Good evening, and welcome to the Transportation and Parking Commission meeting of August 23rd, 2021, which I'm now calling to order at 6:02 p.m. To help slow the transmission of COVID-19 and protect the health and safety of the community, boards and commissions meeting will continue to be closed to the public for in-person attendance. The public is encouraged to watch and participate from the safety of their homes to practice social distancing. The meetings can be viewed on local cable charter channel 6 and AT&T UVerse channel 99, streaming in high def online at glendaleca.gov/live, youtube.com/myglendale, and a free app called ScreenWeave on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire devices. For public comments and questions during the meeting, call 818-937-8100. City staff will be submitting these questions and comments in real time to the appropriate person during this meeting. Okay, so with that, Myrna, can we have roll call?
Chairperson Agerson,
Here.
Commissioner Yakubian,
Here.
Commissioner Nazarian,
Here.
Commissioner Lester,
Here.
Commissioner Bonston.
Here.
Flag salute by Chairperson Agerson.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item is posting of the agenda. The agenda for the Monday, August 23rd, 2021 regular meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission was posted by Thursday, August 19, 2021, before 5 p.m. on the bulletin board outside of City Hall.
Great, thank you. Next item.
Next item is approval of minutes. Approval of minutes for the regular Transportation and Parking Commission meeting of June 28, 2021.
So if there are no comments or questions, do I have a motion approving the minutes of June 28th, 2021?
Yes, I'll make a motion.
Great. Can I have a second?
Second.
Great. Roll call, please, Myrna.
Chairperson Agerson,
Present.
Commissioner Yakubian,
Yes.
Commissioner Nazarian,
Yes.
Commissioner Lester,
Yes.
Commissioner Bonston.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Next item, Myrna, please.
Next item is report only, improving quality of life for bus riders by installing shelter/shade structures at bus stops. This will be presented by Yazdan Emrani.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I will ask our Director of Public Works, Yazdan Emrani, to introduce the item. Mr. Emrani?
Thank you very much. Good evening, Chairperson Agerson and members of the Commission. We have a report this evening for you on the status of our bus stops that need shelters, basically. This report was provided based on a request we got from our council, and we wanted to bring it before your commission to get some feedback on this issue, and then we're going to take it back to the council next month. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our transit manager, Ms. Martha DeAndrea, who has a short presentation on the topic.
Okay, good evening, Chair and Commission members. Today I'm presenting a report on shelter shade structures at bus stops, a quality of life investment. The need for shade at bus stops. There are two main reasons for installing shade at bus stops. The first is global warming. The temperature of the earth is rising and the number of days above 95 degrees will triple by 2050 according to a UCLA study. Also, buildings and roads create urban heat islands that absorb and re-emit the sun's heat. So even if the air temperature reads 91 degrees, the urban heat islands effect will increase the surface temperature by up to 4 degrees. This increase in temperature will make waiting for the bus uncomfortable. The other reason is to add transit amenities. Bus shelter shade structures help to retain transit riders and encourage new riders to take transit by providing a comfortable place to wait for the bus. In 2017, a survey of existing stops by boardings was completed by the transit staff. Of the 467 bus stops located in Glendale, 116 had bus shelters, 234 could not accommodate a shelter due to insufficient space and would not meet ADA requirements, and 117 had the potential to install a shelter. The current 116 shelters were installed through two sources. The first was through the City of Glendale's contract with Outfront Media, which installed 70 shelters with advertising. The second was through the City of Glendale's community redevelopment streetscape projects and street corridor projects that funded an additional 46 shelters. Neither source is available to install new bus shelters. I can't move it. Next slide. It's working. We mapped the 117 potential new shelter locations identified in the survey. The locations are scattered throughout Glendale and serve both Beeline and Metro bus stops. As you can see, they're throughout the city, north, south, central. Let's see if this works this time. Yeah. Staff looked at options available for shelter shade structures. Oops. There we go. Oh. I think, okay, sorry about that. Staff looked at options available for shelter shade structures. Option one is the classic bus shelter. These are similar to the current bus shelters located throughout Glendale. The classic bus shelter is available through a CalArt joint procurement. Option two was a newly designed shade structure. Staff reached out to a bus shelter manufacturer and they designed a single pole shade structure. Unfortunately, it was expensive to install due to the depth of the footing. Option three looked at shade structures from other cities. City of Santa Monica's shade structure that you see there on the right are unique, but also expensive to install. The City of Los Angeles Streets LA is currently in negotiations to select their advertising bus shelter contractor. We are waiting to see if any opportunities to purchase shade structures from their current contract when their current contract becomes available. We are recommending option one, the classic bus shelter. We are seeking Measure S quality of life funding in the amount of $1.1 million to purchase and install up to 117 classic bus shelters at bus stops throughout Glendale. The additional bus shelters will improve the quality of life of transit riders and encourage the use of transit. Finally, the next steps include review the 2017 survey to confirm the number and location of the new shelters. Once the list is finalized and the shelter is selected, Public Works will return to City Council for final approval. That concludes my presentation, and I am available to answer any questions.
Thank you for that presentation. Now I'd like to hear from my colleagues with any questions or comments.
Hi, I'm happy to start. I actually have several questions on kind of different themes, but I'll start with a couple, then open it back up. First off, I'm really excited to hear this item today. I think you know, certainly the shade structures are really necessary. It's exciting to think of amenities that could help promote the use of our transit. And I have some questions to start with the analysis and information that was given. Um, when you mentioned 234 not being possible, 234 sites not being possible to have the existing structures, I guess I'm wondering a little bit, that was based on a 2017 analysis, and that is also based on the existing proposed structures, which are larger. And so some of the alternative structures, which you're not recommending, would have a smaller footprint. Has there been any analysis about how many sites that would open up if we did look at a smaller footprint or had an alternative design for the areas in which the sidewalk cannot accommodate the existing size structure?
So when we started the project, we were looking at any type of a structure, whether it be the classic shelter or just the single pole shade structure. The unfortunate part was that we couldn't find a single pole type of shade structure that would, as you said, would probably be available in more locations, to be installed in more locations. But we just couldn't find, as of right now, in the market, something that we could install at the same price as the others. That doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to look and try to get a shade structure at all of the bus stops that can accommodate some type of shade structure, because I think it's still important to have that goal.
And if I could, I'm sorry, if I could add to that, Mr. Chair, and members of commission, we're also looking at this as kind of a first step, because we do not have the funding right now to do this. So as you saw in the report, we are potentially asking for Measure S funding, and depending on whether or not that would be something that the council is open to, and if we were to move forward, this would be the first phase, which would take probably about a year from the beginning till end in terms of the installation of these bus stops. And then we can then come back and then look at all the other stops, the 234, as second or even second and third phases in terms of other alternatives that could be feasible for these locations.
I have some questions, if I could. So I first just want to say that adding the shelters is a very important it's a very important piece of city infrastructure that will affect transit for decades. And so I think coming to these decisions is it's something to take due consideration, not rush through. I have a couple of questions. It was mentioned in the report that, some of Glendale's shelters that I think I'm familiar with, JC Deco shelters, like there's one in front of Whole Foods. It has ads, and I'm guessing that would be part of the contract for those, was actually what was mentioned in the report, where basically the advertisements pay for the stops. So that arrangement is concluded according to the report, but what are the chances of continuing something like that? The report also said that's what Los Angeles is currently working on. Obviously, the number of these, the greater the number, the better. The other question I had up front was about, a certain amount of ruling out of where these spots could go, these shelters could go, had to do with ADA space constraints. And there are some alternative shade ideas that I didn't see reflected in the report. In particular, some that I believe LA is also considering. I don't have a picture, but there's one idea that it's like a sail. It's like basically a vertical. It's just a pole with a vertical sort of shape on one side that then casts the shadow. and that takes up a lot less space and doesn't seem to. It seems like it wouldn't require such a heavy foundation as a overhead kind of a shade. So I'm wondering if those have been any ideas like that have been considered, and I can send images of it later if it's helpful. Thank you.
Commissioner Lester, we actually, staff went out to see, they had a demonstration of the two finalists for City of Los Angeles program. And I did see that. It's called a shade blade. So it's able to move. The design isn't quite finished yet. So that's a possibility if down the line, City of Los Angeles chooses that company to add those, to provide those solar shades. I mean, yes, shade blades. That would be an option that we might have down the line. But there's some issues, they found some issues with those that they need to rectify, which I'm sure they can.
Can I jump in? This is Commissioner Yakubian. I'd like to make a comment, but I first wanted to maybe pass the ball back to Commissioner Bonston. First of all, nice to meet you. Welcome to the commission. I thought she had mentioned in her opening remarks that she may have a few questions. So I wanted, before I spoke, I wanted just to kind of pass it back to her.
Oh, how kind of you. I didn't want to grandstand too much, but I appreciate the comments about the sale. I also had a question about the City of Los Angeles, the kind of options that are before us there. And it did look like there were some options that looked to have a smaller footprint. And I was kind of curious as to whether they have the same cost issues that were identified with the Santa Monica example, which again is really a basis of the foundation. So I continue to be kind of intrigued by that design and by options that really have that kind of smaller footprint and look to provide more stops with more types of shading. And, you know, Councilmember Kasakian really has been promoting this, and it has like great ideas around this idea of kind of amenities, but also whimsy and like the structures being able to be more than what they offer now. They are, you know, shelters, but we have less rain certainly than we do have sun and heat. And so really looking at these as shade structures and less about traditional kind of rain structures. And I'm also intrigued by the use of, you know, planting trees and other types of shade amenities. I understand that tree planting also requires more of a sidewalk, but I want to encourage us to look at those as options and really, you know, think doing this correctly and right and making a stance to really identify, like helping to identify the beeline as a unique system. And then I did have some questions about, we saw some numbers and I was wondering if those were the daily boardings. That was one kind of side question I had. And a little bit about the grants too. So here's something. I was wondering about the funding. So you had mentioned Measure S funding, but I was curious if there had been considerations about federal infrastructure grants, or even really looking at resiliency and sustainability grants, because I think this transects both. And I'll stop for now. There might be other comments that you know, raise my memory, and I'll bring it back. But thank you.
Let me, Commissioner Bronson, let me answer. The shade blade is much easier to install. It does not need the heavy footing. It would be similar to a bus stop sign in terms of anchoring to the pavement, to the sidewalk. So, and I do agree with you that there is, this isn't a one solution report. I mean, we're just trying to get started and at least do the ones that we have identified and to to secure this funding. There are other funding sources that we're looking at. We're always looking at state and federal funding. Unfortunately, we're not able to necessarily apply for federal funding because we're not a certain type of operator. But we definitely are aggressive in looking at all of the state opportunities, and hopefully they'll be issuing some grant guidelines in the next 6 to 8 months in order to follow through with if the infrastructure bill goes through. So we're looking at that as well. So we're looking at everything. And I agree that the shade blade is a unique type of product that is able to be colorful and kind of, make a neighborhood statement in terms of each neighborhood being a little different. So it lends itself to that customization.
If I could jump back, I wanted to ask about the maintenance of these options. So with option 1, for example, do we have a sense, or has it been looked into as to what expenses there would be to maintain these different options? That's my first question about the maintenance. The second point that I was interested in is one that Commissioner Lester had brought up about the advertising. So I think that's something that, as a commissioner, I'm very interested to make sure that that's looked into to stave off and balance out costs for the city. And the third point that I wanted to ask about was the next bus system. So has there been any thought about incorporating the whole next bus informational system on these bus shelters?
Commissioner Yakubian. So in the maintenance, currently we have those 116 bus shelters, and we hire a company to go out and actually clean not just the shelters, but all the bus stops. So it would be an easy add onto that contract to maintain the additional shelters. It's just I don't have at this moment the cost of what that would be.
Besides the cleaning, though, like the repair or replacement of parts of the shelter, does that get affected? Is that something that...
That's included as well. That company is able to not only clean, but also maintain and repair any of our shelters that need repairing.
And then the next bus system?
So the next bus, so there is, we're looking at adding, the real-time bus arrival information system to the shelters, and even all the way down to, every bus stop. The traditional way is to print up the schedule and put it on the pole, but that's usually not as effective, at least in transit ridership sense. Customers like to know when the bus is coming. They're even willing to wait a little longer, at least knowing when the bus is going to arrive. So there are some new systems out there. There's a new similar to your Kindle, where it's using that white paper and so it's very inexpensive. It can be powered through a solar device. So we're looking at potentially adding those to our shelters and hopefully our bus stops as well.
That's great. That's something I would be greatly in support of.
So I have a couple of questions for you as well. So far, we've talked about the design and where the money's going to come from. It's all great. One of the questions I have is, we've already got 116 shelters, and you're looking at adding roughly the same number. And of course, there's a whole bunch that are not available to add to at the moment, and they might in the future. So depending on the solution that you pick, it's possible that the design element will be different. And so then, is there any thought given down the road to try to bring that design element together so that as a city, we don't sort of have this mishmash of, structures that don't really coalesce into an identity for the city? It's great to have that, but you've seen, I'm sure, in municipalities where they just put whatever and they don't have an identity. So has there been any thought to that? And my other question is, you had a map up earlier of the proposed locations. I would actually personally love to see that with the existing locations as well. So where the existing shelters are today and where the the proposed ones are going to be, as well as all the ones that are not fit for a shelter at the moment.
Can I jump in to say
Sure.
I fully support I'm excited about that. I'm excited about a couple things that I heard. I think yay to the information on the next bus and the details for customers and passengers. And then also the map showing existing and proposed. I'm really interested in looking at it through a lens of equity too. I think a map can help show us kind of where that's going throughout the city. And the other thing that I would add to that, and it may not be possible, but looking at it through the lens of where the shading is most necessary. It's one thing to say whether the sidewalk has the capacity to put it, but I'm kind of interested in prioritizing where the heat island effect happens to be worse. I know that there was some mention in the report about, in fact, looking at a series of the sites that might not need the structures or the stations. Well, I guess the structures anyway, because they're located next to buildings that do have shade. So I think that additional information will be really helpful. So apologize for my enthusiasm as I jumped in.
Can I ask another question, or a comment and a question? I think one other very important aspect that I'd like to see maybe be a part of this is outreach. We have, we're talking about making decisions about the transit riding public, and we need to hear their voices. LA, I know, has offered surveys through their website and shelter demos. I think we can't, we really need to make sure that we're hearing from the people who are riding on a daily basis. I reached out, to one of my Glendale friends, someone who pretty much rides only transit, Kenny Wong. He is an expert in the whole metro system, and he pretty much knows it by heart. He doesn't drive. He just, as far as I know, he pretty much rides transit everywhere. I know, and his comments were, he likes those shelters that I mentioned in the style that are in front of Whole Foods. It's the 4-post kind. But for him, a good shelter has real-time bus data, lighting for safety, and a good shade component. So that's one data point from people who live here. I got other comments from another Glendale resident and former TPC commissioner, Alec Barchersoff, who had a lot of really interesting comments. Just about he had knowledge of what's going on with the LA design process, and very interesting things they're doing about looking at site-specific ways of dealing with shade. Every street, north or south, has a different aspect to the sun, different times of the year. Trees, buildings, all affect these things. And he said that they're looking at ways that shelters can be reversed, for example. Like, there are a lot of times of day where the shelter is there, but the sun shines right under the shelter and hits you. So you'll see transit riders often standing on the other side of there's kind of like a panel in the back. So they're not in the shelter, they're behind the shelter. And so in places where it's possible to look for or possibly to look from a design standpoint, shelters that can be, the shade can be customized according to the space that's there. For example, by reversing it so that the panel may be on the street side, for example, depending on when the prevalent amount of sun hits it, things like that. I also wanted to please follow up, if I could, on my first question, which is why we can't look at the idea of ad-funded shelters as we have in the past. I didn't hear an answer, so I just wanted to ask that one again. Thanks.
So Commissioner, I can answer that last question first. So currently we have an Outfront Media contract. It was signed in 2007 for 10 years, and 2 5-year extensions are possible. We're on the first of the 5-year extension. So we have the potential to go out again and see if we, what we come back with. But that's a decision that I can't make but the option is there if that's something that the City Council would want to do. And in terms of siting, yes, so what we brought forward today is your classic bus shelter. Very difficult to kind of maneuver it depending on how the shade is. But I do understand some of the other, like the blade or some other type of product might work better. City of Santa Monica, that one with the little blue circles, that was supposed to be a shade specific, by each stop. But you can see in that example, the shade is behind the person sitting at the location. So it's kind of an elusive thing in terms of, like, as you said, time of day, time of year, what's worse, and they get shade, sun in the evening or sun in the morning, or, it just depends. So that would create us having to identify and research each stop, which we could do.
I have a follow-up question to something Eli said earlier. Are there any plans for a rider survey, or, realizing that the study that we're basing this on was done at this point, 5 years ago or something like that. So, and was there any input from riders at that point, or?
Chair, the survey was done based on boardings. So theoretically, if a stop has a high boarding, then obviously they would need the shade first, or and go down the line to some extent, So it was a number of years ago. The problem right now is we're coming out of the pandemic, and our riders are slowly coming back. They're not back yet fully. Doesn't mean that we can't go out and survey the riders that we do have, or hold some outreach sessions with riders, even virtually. So we could probably do that.
I just wanted to clarify. I didn't exactly mean like whether or not there was going to be a shade shelter. I was actually referring to more the idea of riders giving input on the types of shades. As you mentioned, there's some where the shade is a bit elusive. There are others that are better, but you don't have space for it. That's kind of where I was going with that.
And Mr. Chair, we could certainly incorporate these, the feedback from the TPC into our staff report for the council, and ask for direction from the council depending on the timing of how soon they want this implemented. And again, comes back to the issue of funding, of course. So we can certainly put that in the staff report and seek direction from them. But these are good comments and feedback.
Thanks, yes. Are there any other comments from my fellow commissioners? No? Okay. Are there any phone calls?
No, no phone calls for this item.
No phone calls. Okay. So if there are no additional comments or phone calls, can I have a motion for a note and file on this item? Oh, I'll motion. Can I get a second, please?
I'll second.
Great. Thank you. Marina, can we have a roll call?
Chairperson Agerson,
Yes?
Commissioner Yakubian,
Yes.
Commissioner Nasarian. Not sure if he left the meeting. I think he did. Commissioner Lester,
Yes.
Commissioner Bonston.
Yes.
Thank you, Marina. What's the next time?
Next item is oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision, but I have no callers.
Okay. And what's the next item?
Commission staff comments and updates.
Great. Are there any comments from staff or updates?
No staff, no comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And are there any comments from my fellow commissioners? Additional comments? Okay. Well,
The next item is adjournment.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
great. So we have a motion and a second to adjourn. Thank you very much for this meeting, and good night. Stay
Thank you.
safe.